Warning: the following describes events and situations that are graphic in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Abyss. On this episode, we'll discuss Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield. Born August 27, 1906, in La Crosse County, Wisconsin, Edward Theodore Gein was a product of an alcoholic father, George, and an overbearing mother, Augusta, who was sibling to an older brother named Henry. The family would move to Plainfield, Wisconsin, which would be their permanent home and the site of some of the most gruesome horrors in history. As a young boy, Gein spent most of his time doing chores on the family farm. His mother, Augusta, would preach to her two young boys, mostly about the immorality of the world around them and her beliefs that other women were the instruments of the devil. During the school years, Gein was described as being shy and being a little off. He could sometimes be seen laughing at seemingly nothing. His loving mother would often punish him for trying to make friends. Alright, let's talk about his mother. She was obviously controlling, feverishly religious, and overbearing. Upon my research, I found that she would preach to the boys like every day, preach to them from the Bible. I think from the Old Testament is what I read. So she would tell these kids literally every day that the world around them is evil, people are no good, she wouldn't let them have friends, they were very secluded. So basically the only people that they knew or talked to day to day was their mother and their father. But their father died at an early age, which we're about to get into. On April 1st, 1940, Ed's father would succumb to heart failure caused by his alcoholism, leaving the two Gein brothers to begin doing odd jobs around the community to help cover living expenses. Henry, Ed's brother, would become worrisome of what he saw as Ed's unhealthy attachment to their mother. He would speak ill of her, which didn't sit too kindly with Ed. The two brothers are considered to be reliable, hardworking, and honest residents of the community. On May 16, 1944, Henry and Ed were burning some vegetation on their farm. The fire turned uncontrollable for the brothers and drew the attention of the local fire department. After the fire was under control and the firefighters had left, Ed reported his brother Henry missing. A search party ensued, and eventually Henry would be found lying face down, dead. Although there were bruises found on Henry's head, the coroner labeled the death as asphyxiation, and the police said there was no foul play. Okay, so yeah, nothing suspicious about that, right? They had the fire. The fire's gone now. Suddenly his brother goes missing. When they find his dead body, there's no indication that he was burned in any way. Like, there wasn't even any first-degree burns on his body. But the brilliant detectives, police at the time, are like, I don't know, Sheriff. Maybe he just dropped down dead. Well, good job, Barney Fife. Great detective work there. Ed, a grown man now, left alone with his mother, who had suffered from a paralyzing stroke. The young man devoted himself to taking care of her as best as he could. But as usual, when death wants you, he takes you. And on December 29, 1945, at the age of 67, Augusta Gein had passed away, thus setting events in motion that would cement Ed Gein in history as one of the most infamous serial killers the world would know. November 16, 1957. A hardware store owner from Plainfield, Bernice Warden, is reported missing. Residents report seeing the store's truck being driven from out behind the building at around 9:30 in the morning. It wasn't until 5 p.m. when Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden, Bernice's son, enters the store to find the cash register open and what appears to be bloodstains on the floor. The last receipt that Bernice had written is for a gallon of antifreeze, sold the morning she disappeared to none other than Ed Gein. The manhunt begins, and Ed Gein is arrested at a West Plainfield grocery store. Meanwhile, the Washaera County Sheriff's Department heads over to the Gein farm. Upon inspecting a shed on the property, a deputy discovers a gruesome scene. He enters the shed to see Bernice Warden's decapitated body hanging upside down by her legs, with a crossbar at her ankles and ropes at her wrists. Her torso was, quote, dressed out like a deer, end quote. If that wasn't disturbing enough, investigators had no idea what they were about to stumble upon inside the main household. Inside the house was squalid, mounds of trash and clutter everywhere. Although the rooms in which his mother used the most were kept in pristine condition, likely a feeble attempt from Ed to avoid the death of his mother. Maybe if I keep it clean, like she still lives here, then she's not really gone, he likely thought. The filthy conditions were the least of Ed's problems. Further inspection would tell a gruesome tale of mutilation, depravity, and insanity. Detectives noticed the objects in Ed's house weren't what they seemed. In fact, they discovered a lot of the objects were actually made from human remains. Brace yourselves, the following is a list of some of the items detectives had recovered in Gein's home. Whole human bones in fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin covering several chair seats, skulls on his bedpost, female skulls, some with the top sawn off, bowls made from human skulls, a corset made from a female torso skinned from shoulders to waist, leggings made from human leg skin, masks made from the skin of female heads, a face mask in a paper bag, later identified as Mary Hogan, a female who had gone missing 3 years earlier, Mary Hogan's skull in a box, Bernice Warden's entire head in a burlap sack, Bernice Warden's heart in a plastic bag in front of Gein's potbelly stove, 9 valvula in a shoebox, a young girl's dress, and the valulas of 2 females judged to have been about 15 years old, a belt made from female human nipples, 4 noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face, and fingernails from female fingers. The horrors they witnessed inside the household would live with them forever. Ed Gein would later confess to the murder of Bernice Warden. Although he claims it was an accident, I find that hard to believe, considering the disrespect he showed her deceased body. And later, he would admit to the murder of Mary Hogan. He would also confess to, while being in a dazed-like state, he would visit as many as 40 local cemeteries at night to collect body parts. He claims on 30 of those trips he awoke from his daze and left the graveyard empty-handed. However, on other occasions, he dug up the graves of recently deceased middle-aged women that he thought resembled his mother, where he desecrated their remains to create his disturbing paraphernalia. It's theorized that Ed Gein's motives for this disturbing behavior was that ultimately he wanted to create a woman suit so that he could become his mother, to literally crawl into her skin. On November 21st, 1957, Gein would be arraigned on one count of first-degree murder and plead not guilty by reason of insanity. He would be diagnosed with schizophrenia and found mentally incompetent to stand trial. He would be sent to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane and later transferred to the Mendota State Hospital, where he would live out his days and eventually pass away in 1984. Although now dead, Ed Gein would live on, being the inspiration for such horror classics as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Silence of the Lambs, and my personal favorite, Dr. Oliver Thredson from American Horror Story Asylum. It is my belief that Ed Gein, albeit committed some horrible atrocities to people and their loved ones, was a product of his upbringing and a man that, if had he not suffered from mental illness, might be telling a different story today. This concludes Tales from the Abyss. Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield. I would like to add to that and reaffirm my belief that I think a lot of Ed Gein's problems was his upbringing and his undiagnosed schizophrenia. I feel like maybe if his mother wasn't who she was, maybe if he wasn't such a mama's boy who was attached to her, that this possibly could not or would not have happened. And I want to say, I'm not here to demonize mental illness. Not everyone who suffers from schizophrenia is out there fucking cutting off people's faces and, you know, doing all that weird shit that Ed Gein did. But back then, mental illness was very, it was a practice that there was probably a lot of people that suffered from mental illness that went undiagnosed and had these problems. I guess this is what I'm trying to say. Not everyone who has mental illness is going to be a fucking serial killer. But I feel like in Ed Gein's case, there might be some, as weird as it sounds, there might be some human decency there. If you take a look at his childhood, he never indulged in all the things that your typical sociopath, serial killer indulged in. You know, he never hurt small animals, never murdered small animals like your run-of-the-mill type serial killer like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, all those guys. They showed a real interest in hurting things at a very young age. Ed Gein didn't. I think the only person he really hurt at a young age, although he was probably a little bit older when he killed his brother. I don't care what the police say. I mean, I think he killed his brother. I think it was a case of he's talking shit about my mom, and I love her oh so much that in his weird little fucking head, he thought it was the right thing to do. So I think to me, it's a sad story. Ed Gein is a very sad story. I feel like he could have been a different person if he didn't have, if his parents weren't who they were, and if he got help at an early age. He had some signs that there was something going on in his head, like we discussed in the story. As a child, people remember him sitting there laughing at nothing. So, you know, that's kind of a sign right there, I guess. Anyways, the point is, I don't think Ed Gein was your run-of-the-mill serial killer. I think deep down, buried really, really, really deep down somewhere in there, there could have been some form of human decency. But unfortunately, the events are what they are, and this is what happened in Ed Gein's life, and this is what he did. As I said before, I totally don't want to demonize people with mental illness. They're not all fucking out there chopping off people's heads. This is just his story, and that's what we're telling today, is Ed Gein's story.